Hi guys, it's Kaz here, and today I'm doing my May wrap up. I read 7 things, so let's just jump straight in. The first thing I read was Milo and Marcus at the End of the World by Kevin Christopher Snipes. This was an arc that I got. It came out last month and I did very much enjoy it. So this is about Milo and Marcus, and when I was going in I wasn't sure whether the end of the world thing was figurative, literal, actual, not actual, and even as you're reading it you're not quite sure. You're like, are these things coincidences? Because throughout the book certain things happen. So for example, an example that happens at the beginning of the book, there's a sinkhole that happens. It's like, oh, that's a bit weird. And then a bit later there's a meteor that comes to Earth and happens to land where these two boys are. And it's this whole thing because the main character is religious, he is a Christian, and these boys met at a Christian camp. They know each other for a few weeks and then it's a few years later, and Marcus becomes a new student at the school that Milo is at. And I like the way it was written because it was thrown in little bits and pieces. There'll be a chapter from a few years ago and it shows how they got to know each other. They were roommates, and they were roommates. And it shows them sort of getting together, not together, but like sort of having feelings for each other but not outright saying anything, but also trying to like show it but not show it because they're at a Christian camp and also they don't want to have these feelings. So there's all that sort of business. And then the now, they definitely have feelings for each other, but Milo is under the impression that these things keep happening because God hates the gays, you know? So he's thinking like, do all these things keep happening because God is mad at me because I like a boy? And that does sound quite heavy, but to be honest, the book is actually quite sweet, it's quite cute. There are obviously heavy topics, we're talking about religion and sexuality, so there are homophobic people in here. There is quite a push and pull with the family as well, the family dynamics. Sometimes it really irritates me when the family are just mean and homophobic to their kid that they pretend that they love. So we do have bits and pieces in here, but generally the book is pretty positive, it's pretty cute, it's good. It went weird towards the end, which I was not expecting, but I won't say why or how or what was the outcome or anything like that because, you know, read it yourself. But it went places I wasn't expecting. It was strange reading it, and then I carried on reading it. I thought, okay. And that is really just not saying anything, but I don't want to spoil it. So yeah, I did enjoy this book. Let's move on. After that I read The Fate of the Ten by Pittacus Law. This is book 6 in the Lorien Legacies. I believe there's 7 books, maybe 8, but I think there's 7, so I think I've only got 1 book left after this. And this one is about a bunch of alien people. Their planet was destroyed and then they ended up on Earth, and then another alien race is coming to get them because they want to kill them and then take over the Earth, all that jazz. And yeah, this book, I really enjoyed it. It was really fast paced. I haven't read this series in a long time, like the book previous to this, it's been a while, but straight away as I was reading it, I like remembered pretty much everything that happened. I was like, oh yeah, that, and then this is happening now. So it does a good job to like remind you at the beginning. So I'm glad it did that, otherwise I would have just been lost. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. Definitely looking forward to reading the last one. This is a series that I have unhauled, not because I didn't like it, but because I don't feel like I need to own it. So now I can unhaul this one. I don't own the last book. Maybe I'll find it in charity shop, maybe I'll get it from the library or something, but I definitely want to read it and finish this series because it's good. It was really interesting. We got a lot of backstory, especially about the baddie in here. We've also got new things happening with powers and such, not wanting to give anything away, and it was just a really fun book to read. Next up, I read The Outsiders by Essie Hinton, and if you watched my Norway vlog you would see that I read it on the way there on the train, well, on the way to the, I've got plane station in my head because my mum always says plane station, airport. On the way to the airport on the train I read this, and then in the airport waiting for my plane I read this. I finished it before I even left the country, but I really enjoyed this book, and it's crazy that it's a classic. There's even a film made of it and I had no idea about anything that happened, which is good because it means as I was reading it I was just enjoying the story and just in the story and didn't have knowledge of knowing where it was going, and it was really good. I definitely think that it's something that can be enjoyed now, then, in the future. It doesn't feel dated. Obviously you can tell that it's set in the past, but the way it's written is very easily digestible and easy to read nowadays, and it doesn't feel like it's an older book, if that makes sense. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I liked the characters, I thought the story was interesting, it was really easy to read, which is what I wanted. I didn't want to be sat for hours in an airport reading something that was clunky and was like boring or whatever. This was definitely not that. So I'm glad that I picked this one up out of the books that I took. It's about teens, it's about gangs, it's about relationships between brothers and family that are not brothers, your friends, how they're part of your family. And yes, I very much enjoyed it. After that, I read Boro Hills by Julia Lynn Rubin. This is another one that I took to Norway with me. I read a little bit of it there and on the way back in the airport again on the way back, but I think I finished this when I got home. This one is a contemporary. It's about this boy. To be fair, it's got like slightly gang stuff in here as well. So apparently I was just all about the gangs without even realising I was going to be all about the gangs. But this is a book about a boy, and again it's about friends, it's about family, it's also about being gay because he likes this boy, and then this new boy comes to school and people don't know what to think of him, but he's very much himself and he doesn't care what people think. And like I say, there's this gang aspect because our main character, whose name is Jack, I'm so bad at remembering people's names, one of his friends is part of a family that deals in drugs and stuff, so that's a big part of the book as well. And it's about just being a teen and living. And I did finish this in the airport. I just remembered because I was reading this and then a weird man started talking to me, and yeah, that was random. I just remembered I didn't finish this when I got back. So yeah, I was sat in the airport, I had like 10 pages left or something, and I was really enjoying it. And then, where was he from? He was from a random country because he couldn't speak English, but he was trying to talk to me, and so he was writing stuff on his phone, and I was like, bro, I'll talk to you for a bit, but now just leave me alone. That was random. But yeah, I enjoyed this book as well. So good times. I took some books that I enjoyed with me. I also took another book that I'm about to talk about, so let's get on to that one. Where the World Ends by Geraldine McCaughrean. Probably not right. This one is the third book that I took with me on holiday, and I read this, well I started reading this when I was waiting for my train to come home, and on the train coming home, and unfortunately this one, it was quite a slog to get through. It took me ages. After I got back to England I was reading it and it took ages to get through. This is set in like the 15s I think, because it's based on a true thing, historical thing that happened. They said it somewhere. Where is it? You don't care, but I'm gonna find it anyway. 1700s, 1730 I think, because it says 2 centuries later there. So yeah, it was something that happened in the 17 something or other, and these boys went to this island, like a really remote island. They live in a remote island in Scotland, St Kilda, and then they went to this other rocky bit to kill birds so they could have food and oil and feathers to sell to make pillows and stuff. And then they got left on there, and then this is a story about them being left on a bit of rock, which sounds like it'll be interesting for me because I like polar stuff, and that's being left in some ice. But unfortunately the way this is written, it was kind of boring. It felt like it took ages to get through, and it's like middle grade, so it shouldn't be. Middle grade for me generally is really fast paced and I get through it quick. But with this, it was just like they were on these rocks, and just over and over again it was just like going out and collecting the birds, and then it just felt like the same thing over and over again, so it felt like it dragged a lot. It wasn't terrible, but it was just not great. So like I said, I'm glad I didn't pick this one up when I was at the airport, because it would have dragged those several hours that I was waiting. But yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't a fan of this. I got it because the cover looked really cool. I can't remember if this was a random book that I found for free or if I paid for it, but either way, it was fine. It wasn't the best. I think reading the bit afterwards about the real story was probably more interesting. And while they're on there, they don't know why they haven't been got, so somebody in a boat's meant to come and pick them up like 30 days after they get there or something, and then nobody shows up, so they're wondering what's going on. And then because it's the 1700s and on this really remote island, it's very religious, so there's a dude there that's being all preachy and saying that it's been the rapture and people have been raptured up there. And the thing is that we don't know if any of this is true because it's based on the true story and the fact that this happened, but everything on the island is kind of like made up. So it might have been better, it might have been worse. And at the end, I'm going to spoiler it, nobody's going to read this anyway. At the end they go back, they finally make their way back to their little island they live on, and it's been overrun by a disease, I can't remember what it was, so a bunch of people have died and that's why no one's come and found them. And then a lot of their different family members have died and stuff. And then in the back, when I was reading it, it said that in real life, all of the boys on the island survived, because in the book, I think one of them died. But when they got back to the island that they lived on, I think they said that there was like one person that hadn't died. So that's kind of harsh. Not gonna lie. So yeah, I found like the actual real story more interesting than the book, unfortunately. So about halfway through, let's nip on over to the message from the spawnies, and then I've got the last couple of books to get through. Hey, lovely boy. How the devil are you? You're looking after my books. Very kind. After that, I read Madhouse at the End of the Earth by Julian Sancton. This is non-fiction about the Belgica voyage, Antarctic expedition, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And it's so weird because this expedition, it's not got a lot of things written about it for some reason. Like, it's said in the back of this book, like the author was talking about it, how he heard a little snippet of it about something else, and then was really interested in it and tried to look into it, and like hardly any books have been written about this expedition, even though it's really interesting and, well, like emotionally and humanly it's interesting, but also scientifically it's interesting, and like nobody's written about it. Why not? But now they have, and it's really good. Also, this was the first expedition to the Antarctic that Roald Amundsen was on, who then several years later became the first person to reach the South Pole. So it's really cool to read his sort of origin story in a way, because he was on this boat. And yeah, about 122 pages in, I was like, you know what, this is so interesting and so many things I want to remember. So I went back and got a highlighter and highlighted loads, and I've never done that before, and it was really enjoyable, and I really enjoyed the experience of doing it. I'll give you a little flick through. I'll just flick through, I'm sure you'll see some, yeah, little highlighty pages, because there's just so much cool stuff going on. So I highlighted several things. Some of the things I highlighted were like actual quotes from people that are on the boat. Also, side note, it's weird that hardly any books have been written about this expedition, because it's one of the most recorded expeditions ever, because almost all of the men that are on the boat had a diary, like really in-depth diaries. So there's loads written about it, there's loads of information out there that Sancton managed to find, and it's really cool because a lot of it would be like their actual words. So this is written, you know, like some non-fiction is written about it, like the author's writing about them, and some non-fiction it's like you're in there with them. That's what this one's like. So you're there, you're in this big boat and it gets trapped in the ice, and then they're winter in there, which means that there are months where it's complete darkness, and because it's complete darkness and because they haven't got the right food, they're getting scurvy, they're going mad, they're getting ill, and they can't sleep, but they're also exhausted and they're lonely, but also they're stuck in this place with these men. It's really good the way it's written, and just the expedition in general is really good. they did manage to get out. They did lose 2 people. So one guy died because he fell off the boat when it was a storm and he landed in the water and they couldn't get him out. And that was really harrowing because the captain of the ship actually jumped in after him. He was like, no, I'm saving him. And he got him, but then he couldn't keep hold of him. So it was harsh for him. I bet he had some trauma about that. And then another guy died because he already had some conditions, and scurvy makes previous conditions come back. So he had a heart condition, he got ill from scurvy, and then it made his heart worse, and then he died. All the other men survived, although one of them, the madness in this title, one of them, a young Norwegian man, went the maddest. And he actually said at the back that he was one of the guys that kept a diary, but the other men on the expedition burnt the diary so no one could read it because they didn't want people to see into his mind, because he wasn't all there, bless him. And when he got back, he got sent to a mental institute and he lived there for the rest of his life. So, you know, scurvy, it don't fuck about, it will do you in. But yes, this is really interesting, it's really good. I'm sure you're all bored of me talking about it now, but I will say, I've talked a little bit about the men and the human side of it, but the scientific side of it was also really interesting. So some of the things I highlighted in here were just like scientific things that they discovered. They were the first people to find this. This was the only native animal thing that's just in the Antarctic was discovered, and then loads of like planty sort of things, and then they were talking about penguins and stuff. And they collected, the scientists, there were like 2 scientists I think, they collected so much scientific information. It took 40 years to collate it all and put it out to the world, because there was that much to get through. That's mind-blowing. And also there was the scientific findings, but also there was the medical findings. So Dr. Cook, who after this expedition, he was a bit of a fraud, so his reputation was tarnished. He went to jail for several years for fraudulent things. And it's unfortunate because in here, he was very much the reason that these men survived. Like, he was the doctor, he was the one that realised that they needed to eat other things so they didn't go mad, so they didn't die. And he was also the first person ever to use light as like a medicine. So one of the things he told the men to do was stand naked in front of like a fire for an hour a couple of times a day. The reasons weren't necessarily there. He thought his hypotheses of why this would work weren't correct, but now, even now to this day, light therapy is used for people that have like seasonal disorders. So he's actually the first person to use light therapy, even though he didn't know why, the exact reasons. It was a thing, and it was really interesting to read. So yeah, and I really enjoyed the whole highline stuff. And yeah, I'll shut up now because I'm sure you don't care anymore. And then last but not least, I read Lost in the Netherwoods by Aidan Thomas. So I've had this one for a little while and I've heard very mixed things, but mostly mixed towards the negative side of things. So I went into this, first of all, I've been putting it off a bit because of that, but I went into this with no expectations. I didn't want to think, I love Cemetery Boys. I gave Cemetery Boys 5 stars and I am very stingy with 5 stars. So I didn't want to go into this with any expectations, but even without any expectations, unfortunately, I wasn't a fan. I gave it 2.5 stars. It was just, the way it was written wasn't engaging. The characters are all one-dimensional. I didn't care about them. None of them had a personality. The storyline was just meh. It was slow, but it also, I didn't care about anything. I didn't care about any of the characters. We had Wendy in here, so 5 years previously, Wendy and her 2 brothers went missing. She came back 6 months later, had no memory of it, and her brothers stayed missing. And then 5 years later, Peter Pan turns up. She realises that this is the Peter Pan from the stories that her mum used to tell her, and she used to tell her brothers. And then there's this whole thing about somebody's been nicking kids recently, and they're wondering if it has anything to do. Would you stop hitting stuff? Rude. They're wondering if it had anything to do with her brothers going missing 5 years ago. So the premise sounds interesting, but it really just wasn't it. It felt like the whole retelling aspect was just not fresh. There was nothing unique or interesting about it. there was Peter Pan, her name's Wendy Darling. Like every part of the story, oh look, there's a shadow, and he mentioned that she had to sew his shadow on in the past. It just felt like there was nothing new brought to the story of Peter Pan, even though obviously it was very different, but it just felt like there was no magical whimsy in the story. I didn't care about any of the characters. Wendy's parents were both very just like cliche. Oh, the brooding dad that goes in his room and drinks alcohol and he doesn't show any love to his daughter or his wife. And the mum that just like sits around and doesn't really show any emotion, and she's just kind of there and floating around in the background. But it didn't show you any other emotion. And surely they've got emotion. Like their two sons went missing, their daughter went missing but came back. But it's like they're very just like one note all the way through. It wasn't the best. It was a slog to get through, to be quite honest. I mean, I finished it a few days into June, but I wanted to put it on my May thing because I started it in May. But yeah, it just wasn't the best. And then also Wendy has a friend, and then they do that really annoying, unnecessary thing where they fall out for no reason. Like a really stupid, poxy reason. Like, oh, you didn't call me when you said you was going to call me. Now let's fall out even though we've been friends all our life. It just feels like unnecessary drama, and I hate it when that sort of thing is put in a book, because like, if you want the friends to fall out and have drama, give me a reason for it. Like a literal, actual reason why this person would be annoyed at this other person. And it just felt really just thrown in there for dramas. And then it wasn't even resolved. It was like, stuff happened, the ending happened, and then it was a bit later and they were already back friends, so we didn't see any of the resolution. So it just felt pointless. And then at the end, there's a big bad in here. I won't tell you what or how or why or when. But there was all the monologuing of the big bad telling you all the stuff. And I was just like, you know what? Show don't tell. I don't mind if you tell a bit, but stop monologuing. You're a big bad. Stop monologuing. So yeah, unfortunately, wasn't a fan of this. There was nothing like specifically bad with it. It was just everything was very mediocre. The storyline, the characters, the way it was written. Everything mediocre. But I've not fallen out with Aidan Thomas. I did read at the end that this is like a 7-year thing that's been going on with Aidan Thomas. Has been working on it 7 years. I feel like potentially maybe it was a passion project that they didn't realise wasn't that good. Sometimes you get so attached to a story, you're blinded by the fact that you've been working on it 7 years and you don't realise that it's shit. So I'm not mad at that, it's fine. I love Cemetery Boys, and I'll definitely be reading Aidan Thomas's next book that's coming out soonish, whatever. It's got a book title and stuff, so it's coming out soon. So hopefully this is the blip. This is the exception to rule, and hopefully it's not Cemetery Boys that's just like the outlier and good, and the rest of the stuff like this. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye out though. So there we have it. Those were all the things that I read in May. There were some great ones, there were some not so great ones. It was a bit of a mixed bag, but you know, that's how we roll. So yeah, let me know down below what you read in May. If you read any of these, what were your thoughts, what were your feelings? Do any sound interesting? Are you potentially picking some up now? Let me know down below. And if this is your first video by me and you enjoy it, then please check out some of my others. And if you continue to enjoy, please subscribe, that'd be awesome. Anyway guys, I'll see you in a few days with another video. Bye. Oh dear me. You're so rude. You're so freaking rude. Why? Why are you trying to push more off?